Hi, everyone. It is Jamie Joe right here at Mad Lit Musings, and I'm excited today to have Gabrielle Meyer with us. Hi, Gabrielle.
Hi,
How are you doing?
I'm good. How are
Good,
you?
good. I'm doing really well. And I'm excited to have you back because we have books to talk about.
We do.
I
I was
love
trying to
books.
remember the last time I was on your show. I think it was 2 years ago. I don't think I was on last year.
I don't think you were
Um,
last year.
yeah,
Yeah, for whatever
it's good to be
reason.
back.
Yeah, it's good
Yeah.
to have you back. It's good to have you back. And you've probably just been busy time traveling because you've been,
Yeah, I wish.
I
Actually,
know,
that's part
right?
of why I write is because I wish I could time travel. Wouldn't that be fun?
Oh, it would be so much fun. I was looking at some old pictures. Well, I have one of them like right here. My dad moved, and so I inherited my mom's boxes of just old black and white photographs, and they're filled with all these old people from our past. And I was looking at those, and then I went to visit my dad, and one of the men at his retirement community had his entire display of working restored Victrolas. And he was
Wow.
playing, the hand crank and the big
Yep.
long tube, and he was playing a record, it wasn't really a record, whatever they call them, of 2 people talking from 1910.
Wow.
And I said, "This is," I'm
Gives me
kinda like,
chills.
yeah, I know, right? Like, I've been looking at all these old pictures, and then I go to that, and I hear these voices that are 115 years old, and I'm like, "This is as close to time travel as I will ever get," right?
Yeah, it's really
And
cool.
it was so cool, and they were, like, yelling at each other, like they didn't know how to talk in a microphone, like, "Hi, how are you?"
That's funny.
Oh, that's pretty cool, but yeah, so you write time travel.
I do. Yep.
Yeah, and tell us a little bit about the book that's coming out here.
Sure. Yeah, so my time travel is a little bit different than probably most people expect. So most time travel, it's a person who accidentally falls through a portal of time. They
Mhm.
might even purposely go through to try to save somebody. And then when they get through that portal, they either are trying to get back to their normal time or, all of a sudden they fall in love or they have to win a war or something happens. And so I was thinking about it one day and I thought, what if you were born with two lives? And at one point you have to decide which life to keep and which one to forfeit. And so that was kind of what triggered my timeless series idea.
Mhm.
I've had two books that have released already. When the Day Comes was book one, and In This Moment was book two. And now in May 7th of 2024, I have For a Lifetime,
There you
and that one's
go.
releasing. Yep. Each book, a lot of people ask me this, each book does stand alone as its
Okay.
own story. But it's really good to actually start with the first book because book two will give away spoilers in book one.
Okay.
Book three gives away spoilers in the first two. I've had a few people who didn't realize there was a book one and they read book two first, and they said they still enjoyed reading book one, but because they knew, all of the main spoilers, it
Mhm.
kind of takes away a little bit of the discovery. But each one is about like the next generation in the family.
Right.
So they inherit this gift, and they know at birth if they have this gift because they have a mark. It's like a birthmark, and
Okay.
that distinguishes them as a time crosser.
Ooh. Oh, I wanna
Yeah.
be a time crosser. Where's this bookmark? Is it on your hand or your wrist? I gotta look for it.
So, if you are a time crosser that goes forward in time, you have a birthmark on your chest. And
Okay.
if you're a time crosser that goes back, you have
Uh-huh.
a birthmark on the back of your head.
Okay.
The ones that have the one on their chest go forward 21 years. So they get to choose on their 21st birthday. And if they have the mark at the back of their head, they go back in time, and they have 25 years to choose. So
Okay.
kind of,
Interesting.
yeah. And those are each book kind of reveals a little bit more of the mythology of the time crossing, and you learn
Okay.
about new rules and maybe loopholes that different time
Okay.
crossers didn't know.
Okay. And does it kind of like reveal a little bit too, like how it all started, like where it came from?
I have not um,
Oh.
tackled that, and part of it's because I don't know. Um, you know, each of these characters don't really know where it came from
Right.
either. They just know that their family has this gift. Whether they call it a curse or a blessing, it depends on
Yeah.
how their stories play out. But I haven't really quite tackled yet how that happens or, where it
Where
started.
it
I,
started.
yeah, I don't know. I have to think about
Hmm.
it. I've had a few ideas.
You could like open up for fan fiction and just let your fans like write that. Say, here's a
That
fan
would be
fiction
fun.
contest. Where did it
That would
start?
be, yeah,
Where
that's
did
a
it
good
come
idea.
from? Because I've actually had some thoughts when I was reading it. I was like, huh. So did this go back to like some sort of early American or like prior to coming over, was there a small sect of people? And then my brain just went into all these weird random places. And it was, I think I got tied up in the imagination of that sometimes more than the story because I was trying to figure it
Right.
out.
A lot of people tell me as they're reading these stories, they do think deeply about a lot of those things, and that's
Yeah.
kind of fun.
Yeah.
Actually, one of my initial thoughts was that it could have gone back to the mark of Cain. Cain was marked
Ooh,
after, right?
there
And so
you
I'm like, oh,
go.
maybe that's what that mark was.
Ooh,
So that's kind of, I've just announced it here, right?
there.
Never talked to anybody about it, but that was kind of my initial thought was
There
that
we go.
maybe it's back
Yeah.
at the very beginning.
So we could make
So,
this an exclusive podcast episode with
right?
with Gabe and just be like, "Hey, guess what? You will learn where it came from." Maybe a theory.
That's
It's a
funny.
theory.
A theory.
Okay,
Yeah.
so book 1 and 2 covered what time periods before we talk about book 3?
Sure. So book one is about Libby, and she lives in 17, or her story, I should say, takes place in 1774, Colonial Williamsburg, and 1914, New York City.
Okay.
Then book two, for reasons that you learn in book one,
Mm,
Maggie has three timelines. So she has 1861, 1941, and 2001, and they're all in Washington, D.C., pretty
okay.
much.
Okay.
They move out. She moves out from there. And so book three is about identical twin sisters. They have the mark together. So they move between 1912
Okay.
and 1692 during the Salem witch trials.
Oh my goodness, because that was like
Yeah,
a very calm, peaceful
right.
time in American history.
So, of course they're marked. So, and
Hmm.
there's a lot of speculation, because you learn right away at the beginning that their mother has died,
Okay.
when they were babies, and their father doesn't talk about her. And so they're trying to figure out who was she and why
Hmm.
was she, why did she die and why does nobody
Hmm.
know who she is? Um, and the sisters are very, very different. Actually, they're inspired by my girls, Ellis and Marin, who are not
Hmm.
twins, but they are like night and day.
Sure.
Their personalities are very different. And so Hope in the book is very outgoing, and she just kind of like doesn't really care like what the people in Salem think about her. She just wants to focus on 1912 because she has just learned how to fly. She's one of the first females to get her pilot's license. And Grace is a little bit more steady, calm. She's
Hmm.
always trying to keep Hope like grounded. And
Hmm.
she's always trying to tell her, keep your mouth shut. Like we're literally walking into the Salem witch trials. Anything that you say might be used against you. And Hope's
Hmm.
just like, whatever. So
Whatever.
it's kind of fun to, I actually talked to both of my girls when I was writing this.
Hmm.
I would give them scenarios and I would say, what would you do? And they started to debate back and forth what they would do. And I was just taking notes.
Yeah.
Like,
Like, thanks for writing my
yep,
book for me.
yep, exactly. So that was fun.
Okay,
And it
so
was fun.
you have two identical twins. So do you play
Mhm.
off of the identicalness too, like when they swap time periods? Like one of them
Not
is like, do they switch
really.
places at all, or
No,
okay?
that could have
Let's
worked.
just complicate
But
it more.
yeah, they are very different. They look exactly alike, but anybody who knows them can tell
Sure.
them apart really well. But even in 1912, Grace is an investigative journalist. She's very much about justice and
Okay.
and all of that, where Hope is just more like she's just living life. Like
Okay.
she cares about people, she loves people, but
Yeah, of
really it's
course.
kind of what she's out there doing her thing for her, her own adventure. And
Hmm.
so yeah, it was a lot of fun. And that's some of the early reviews have remarked, and even my editor said, because it's in first person point of view for both of them. So
Okay.
it could have gotten really confusing really fast if they weren't very different. And
Yeah,
so a lot of people have commented on how easy it is to tell them apart in the
that's
book.
good.
So
Yeah. It
yeah,
is nice when you're reading a book and there's that much switching to not have to get confused, which which character am I reading now, and
Right. Yeah.
having that distinction is great. Okay.
Yeah.
So, are there parallels between their story when you have 1912 and Salem witch trials? Because I'm trying to think, like, those are two very extremely different
Yeah.
time periods.
You know, so like in the first book, I chose 1774 and 1914, because in 1774 we were fighting the American Revolution, or it was just starting, and in 1914 the American uh, elite were trying to buy back into the British aristocracy. So there was that kind of, connection. And then in the second book, 1861, 1941, 2001, we were at the beginning of wars in each, very pivotal moments in American history. So there was a lot of similarities. In For a Lifetime, there's nothing. It was just really, it was partially because of just how the series had laid out. I knew I
Mhm,
needed certain time periods. But what was fun to play with is the very different culture. So in 1692, Puritan Massachusetts, you have a very Calvinist approach to Christianity. You know, you were chosen, you did not, there was
mhm.
the elite, all of that. And there it was just so there were so many rules and laws and everything. And then in 1912, you have kind of this rebirth in the nation. There's this very different approach to Christianity. You know,
Mhm.
Christianity is Christianity, but there was
Right.
different viewpoints about it. And then there was this whole idea of women were kind of stepping into these roles that they had never really had a chance to be in. So like flying was one of them. Investigative journalism was another one. And so it was fun to play with those two very different time periods and
Yeah.
cultures.
Yeah. That's cool. So, studying the Salem witch trials, let's go there first. What did you find was some of the most interesting tidbits that you were like, "Oh, I've got to somehow incorporate this into the story?"
So one of the reasons I chose the Salem witch trials is because I'm actually descended from people on both sides of the
Yep.
trials. So I'm descended from the Proctors who were accused and the Putnams who were some of the worst of the accusers. Um, and so I'd actually been to Salem a few times knowing that. And the history of it in particular was what I wanted to really like the real history. Like I went
Mhm.
to Salem and around Halloween, do not go around Halloween. There was just so many people. It was just
Mhm.
mind-boggling how many people and just people dressed up in really demonic clothes and just
Sure.
what you know what I mean? And so there
Yep.
was this commercialization of witchcraft that really was troubling because the 19 individuals who died were not witches.
Right.
And so that was one of the main things that I wanted to communicate in this book. And I even say in the author's note that I wanted to try to give the history without my own personal
Mhm.
opinions about what happened, because nobody really knows what happened. There's some really
Right.
good theories out there. Um, but then I went back again the next year and we went in November because that was the only time we could go. And
Mhm.
I actually did a lot of research before I went and found out that the witch trials didn't even start in Salem as we know it.
Okay.
There's a town about 5 miles away called Danvers. It was Salem Village at the time. There was Salem Village and Salem Town, not to be
Oh,
confusing,
interesting.
right?
Okay.
And it was actually Salem Village, which is now Danvers, Massachusetts, which is actually where it started. And it started
Okay.
with the minister's daughter and his niece.
Mhm.
And so there's a lot of different things. I could talk about it forever, but I won't. But
Oh, I'm
there's a
sure.
lot of different things
I'm
playing into
sure.
it. There was a war going on. There was a lot of refugees who had come into or to Salem Village. Um, so one of the things that I found really fascinating was that there was a 4-year-old girl who was accused, and she
What?
spent months in prison or jail. So her mother was Sarah Good, and Sarah Good was one of the first of the three women accused. So it was Tituba, who was
Mhm.
an enslaved woman, Sarah Good, who her husband had abandoned her basically, and she had two little kids, Dorothy, and then she had a little baby boy. And then Sarah Osborne, who was a woman who, from in today's standards, we would see that she suffered from depression,
Okay.
probably bipolar
Sure.
disorder, but she had also married her indentured servant. And
Oh.
so she and she was in a legal battle with the Putnams from her first husband's There's some property issues.
Hmm.
Anyway, so these three women were accused. Well, they brought little Dorothy Good in, and she actually testified against her mother as a 4-year-old, which I have no idea who was talking to her, how they got her to agree to do it, but they actually she testified against her mother. And then after her mother was condemned, um, one of the girls, Ann Putnam Jr., claimed that little Sarah Good had bit her and that was all it really took for her to accuse Sarah or Dorothy. And so Dorothy went into jail. This little 4-year-old girl sat in jail for months when
Oh
this
my
all took
goodness.
place. So one of the misconceptions is that, it was just women who were
Hmm.
accused and that it was all
Hmm.
these men who were doing the accusing. It was actually a group of teenage girls who did most of the accusing, and it was men and women who were accused. Over 200 people were accused, 19 of them were killed. So,
Wow.
yeah, it's just, so it's a really tough part of history. Honestly, it was one of the hardest things I've ever researched just
Hmm.
because it just hit different knowing that some of my ancestors were
Right.
part of it.
Yeah.
But it was hard to write too. But part of the reason it was hard to write is because I wanted to relate it in a way that didn't make people feel uncomfortable reading it.
Hmm. Hmm.
There was a sense of, discomfort because of what it is, but I
Right.
didn't want anybody to read it and think it was so heavy and depressing. I
Hmm.
just kind of wanted to relay it as they experienced it. So
Right. Right.
anyway, yeah,
Wow. Like my brain's going like, who in their right mind would find a 4-year-old a credible witness? And then who in their right
yeah,
mind would imprison a 4-year-old?
right.
Like,
Yeah.
wow. Okay, I had not heard that one before.
Yep. And they also had to pay for their time in jail. So a lot of
Oh.
people sat in jail longer than necessary because they couldn't afford to pay their bill.
Mm.
Um, and if you were accused and you denied it, those were the 19 people that died. If you said, yes, I am in fact a witch, you just sat in jail until it was over. And so that plays into the whole idea too of like, where's the justice in that? So
Well,
and there
yeah,
was
and
no
then it's like,
justice at all,
was it really a witch hunt then? Because if they technically caught the authentic witches,
right?
you'd think it
Yeah.
would be reversed. Like
Yep.
those would for
Yep.
sure have been condemned or something,
Yep.
whatever the situation is. So,
Yep. But the teenage girls who did all of the accusing, if somebody came into the courtroom and they denied it, they just freaked out. They would convulse and scream. But if somebody came in and said, yes, yes, it is true, the girls were very calm. I mean, they were teenage girls for crying out loud.
oh
They
my
were
goodness.
just, yeah, yeah, the whole thing.
I thought teenage girls, middle school girls in this day and age were trouble, but maybe we've got it easy.
Yeah,
Oh my goodness, that's just absolutely, absolutely intriguing and terrifying if you live there. So yes, let's plant some characters in Salem Witch Trials, and then we fast forward and we go into 1912, where
yeah,
because
yeah,
planes wouldn't have been considered witchery by any
right,
means.
right. Well, that's part of the problem is that Hope will talk to her sister Grace about flying. And literally during the Salem witch trial, that was one of the things, a lot of
Sure.
what we imagine about witches came from that, like flying on brooms and stuff. It
Right,
all
right.
legitimately was what they believed. So, yeah, so that's kind of Hope's, like, haha, I actually am flying, but I'm not a witch. But I am a time crosser, so am I? You know, it's just so many things. It was fun to play with those characters because they
Hmm.
were so unique.
Right.
So yeah, 1912, just a very different, prosperous and exciting time
Hmm. Hmm.
in the world, especially in America.
Hmm.
So one of the fun things that I do when I create these characters, and the plot is I like to find real people who lived during those times. And so Hope's character is loosely based off of Harriet Quimby, who is the
Okay.
first woman
Hmm.
to get her pilot's license in America.
Hmm.
And she actually is the first woman who successfully flew over the English Channel in
Right.
1912. And she did it the day before the Titanic sunk. And so when she woke up the next morning, she thought she would see her name everywhere, in the newspapers, but
Yes.
all they could talk about was the Titanic.
Right.
So, And she was a fascinating woman too. She was on Broadway. She was an investigative journalist, and she also appeared in some early films, and just a really interesting woman to research. So
Quite the go-getter for that era. Really
she
kind of
was, yeah,
breaking out of the Victorian mold into the new
yeah,
age of feminism and women.
yeah.
Awesome, awesome. Okay, so the only other thing I was going to ask about this, because I know there's not a whole lot I can ask without spoilers just coming out and oozing into the podcast. We don't want to do that. But
Yep.
you said that at the end of your books, or at a point in your books, each character has to choose which time period they stay in. So my thought process is less to do with, oh, they have to pick a time period, which one do they pick and why? And more with, how do you deal with the emotional ramifications of that? Because I'm thinking in my head, okay, you're going to have relationships with people, parental, familial, romantic, whatever, in each time period. So no matter which one they choose, to a degree, they're losing some
Mhm.
emotional ties. So how do you deal with that situation?
Yeah, honestly, that's been one of the biggest struggles in this series, especially for book two, because she had three timelines and she loved
Mhm.
all of them
Yeah.
equally. Book three, they did not like the Salem 1692 timeline, so they had pretty much in their minds been like
Okay.
accepting that they wouldn't choose it. Um, so, and it's hard too because I want to delve into the emotional depths. And I think a lot of people who've read these stories will say that they are very emotional. But sometimes it's hard to really dive in as deep as I would like to
Mhm.
for time's sake. The
Mhm.
book needs to
Yeah.
kind of move on. And um, so part of it is that I like to just assume that, because they're born with this gift and because they understand what's going to happen, that hopefully they've been preparing themselves for the
Yeah.
goodbyes.
Yeah.
And part of how I look at it too is that for many, many generations, different people who traveled. Let's say you were in England or Ireland and you knew that you were going to immigrate to the United States. You would
Mhm.
probably never see your family again. You
Right.
would you would have to say goodbye.
Yeah.
Yes, there would be letters and stuff, hopefully. But even if you were in the East Coast and you were gonna go out to Oregon, you knew you were saying your
Mhm.
goodbye.
Right.
And so that's kind of how I look at it too. Like they
Okay.
know they're going to say their goodbye.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, that's the easy answer. But
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
course, things don't turn out exactly how they ever planned, and
Well,
so they have
never
to deal with
does.
that too.
Yeah. Exactly. Exactly. Okay. So this book, for a lifetime, is out in May. And
Hmm.
then we do know, because you said I could say this, that there's a
Yes.
book four and a book five coming in the
Hmm.
same series. So can you
Yeah.
tell us where we're going to go in those, or is that still top secret?
Nope. So book four is going to actually okay, so I step aside a little bit from this particular family line, and the heroine in book four is she has grown up without a time crossing parent to guide her for
Okay.
different reasons that you'll
Mm-hmm.
find out. So
Mm-hmm.
she knows nothing about the rules of time crossing. She has no guide. And so her story is she's trying to find her time crossing mother.
Okay.
And she has one little clue as to where she might be. And so the whole book and both timelines, she's in 1727 and 1927. So
Okay.
in 1727, and this is not too much of a spoiler because it's on the book.
Mm-hmm.
But she is looking for her mother and she boards a ship and her path intersects with the pirate. So there's
Okay.
pirates in that
Mm-hmm.
one.
Mm-hmm.
And then in 1927, it's the whole Roaring Twenties,
Yep.
gangsters, all of that. And her father in that one is a world famous pastor that was
Okay.
inspired by Billy Sunday, who was one
Mm-hmm.
of the first major evangelists.
Yep.
And so she is the daughter of a pastor over here, and she's trying to keep hidden some of her brother's secrets.
Mm-hmm.
There's a bootlegger in the family that nobody knows about. So
Oh.
she's trying to, keep up appearances over here in
Yeah.
1927. Well, in 1727, she's on this quest to find the answers about her time crossing. So, my Pirates and Gangsters book, the cover is stunning. I revealed that Bethany House
Mm-hmm.
came up with a beautiful cover. All of them are beautiful, but that one's
Right.
probably my favorite. And
Okay.
then in May 2025, Um, I kind of veer back towards this line of family members,
Okay.
and the young lady lives in 1938 in Washington, D.C. She works for the Smithsonian,
Okay.
and she also lives in 1888 in England. So she only has
Mm.
50 years between her time crossing, which is very unique because all of the other ones have
Hmm.
had centuries between them.
Right.
So she could potentially run into
I was just gonna
people
say
or,
you could have some
yeah,
more than just time crossing. You could have
yep,
some relationship crossing.
yep. And so she's invited by the London Museum to go over to England in
Hmm.
1938, which is dangerous because we're at the
Right.
beginning
Cusp of
of,
war.
yep, on the cusp of war. But she goes anyway, and she is told when she gets there that she is going to be putting together an exhibit about Jack the Ripper. And it
Ah,
will be
okay.
the 50th anniversary of Jack the Ripper.
Hmm.
And when she's doing research, she finds out that her sister from 1888 will be the last victim of Jack the Ripper.
Oh, okay.
So she has to decide if she's going to try to reveal who history has chosen not to reveal as
Hmm.
Jack the Ripper. And one of the time crossing rules is that if you knowingly change history, you forfeit the path that you try to change. And so she has a lot of decisions to make.
I guess so. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
And
she could, she could do, it would be good from one standpoint to probably know who Jack the Ripper was. From another standpoint, like, why ruin a perfectly good historical mystery?
right, right. And so she loves history. So she works
Yeah,
for the Smithsonian. She's a
exactly.
curator. And so she really respects history, and that's another issue that she's having. But I read a lot of different books, different theories about Jack the Ripper, and one that I
Hmm.
landed on that's really fascinating is that it was a cover-up by the Freemasons.
Hmm. I've heard of
And
that.
so
Yep.
I get
Yep.
into the Freemasonry part of it,
Hmm.
and she realizes that things are coming a lot closer to her front doorstep than she
And
had
she
initially thought.
realizes.
So,
All
yeah,
right. Well, everybody, start getting all your pre-orders in. And that way you can
yeah,
time travel with these books and do it
mhm,
safely. You can time travel
yes,
safely. And be sure that you can come back to your current time period.
right.
Oh, fun. Well, this was a blast to chat. And looks like we've got two more books coming, so probably two more chats would be a good thing to plan
Yes,
on. So
love that.
let's do that. Well, thank you so much for being with us. And people can check out your books probably at your website, I'm assuming.
Yep, GabrielleMeyer.com.
All right.
You can find out everything there. Yep,
All right. Sounds good. Thank you so much for being part of the show today.
thanks for having me.